I don't know about the rest of you, but there are some stories that people keep bringing up from when I was a lot younger that they try to still present as fact to what I'm actually like today. It's a pet peeve. People grow and they change and they do stupid things sometimes, but it doesn't define who they are for all eternity, unless apparently you are someone from a Bible story. Our reading for this morning comes from John chapter 20, verses 19 through 31. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked for the fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Poor Thomas. He has been given a most unfortunate nickname that he has never been able to shake. I've said before that he must have been the inspiration for Missouri's state motto, the Show Me State. We have taken to calling him Doubting Thomas because of this passage, and it is a millstone that has hung around this poor man's neck for centuries. I was always taught one main thing about this story in Sunday school. Don't be a Doubting Thomas. Don't be like him. Don't question things. Just have faith. Because if you have doubts, Jesus will be sad and things won't be good for you. My question as I got older was, how do we know that things were bad for Thomas after this? We don't really hear anything else out of him after this. There is, however, an episode with Thomas several chapters before. In John chapter 11, in the story of raising Lazarus from the dead, we are told that Jesus and the disciples had been chased out of the area where Lazarus lived. When they got the call to go back and see Lazarus, the disciples all said, "We can't go back there. You'll get killed. They just chased us out. You can't be serious about going back there." Jesus basically says, "My dudes, trust me, we're going back because I'm going to do something you won't believe." The disciples don't want to go, but it is Thomas, not Peter, not John, but Thomas, who looks at the others and says, "Hey, we have to go with him, and if we die, we'll die with him." That is not what someone says when they have a lot of doubts about something. We don't talk about that Thomas story very much, because we usually want to focus on Lazarus. But Thomas was the one who talked the disciples out of a place of fear and into following Jesus back into danger. He wasn't a doubter by nature. He was a disciple who followed and loved his Lord. There was a lot of fear going on immediately after the crucifixion and into the time immediately after the resurrection. It's worth pointing out in both of these encounters from our passage, the disciples are in a locked room. So let's not dump all the heat on our boy Thomas here. But yeah, he didn't believe them the first time they said that they had seen Jesus. Maybe he thought it was too good to be true. Maybe he thought his friends were pulling a fast one on him. Maybe he couldn't quite bring himself to believe that Jesus had actually risen. Either way, when Thomas has his own encounter, he sees and he believes, and he says, "My Lord and my God." He knows who Jesus is in that moment. Those doubts are gone. And then Jesus says, "You have seen and believed, but blessed are those who have not seen, yet still believe." It is unfortunate that we have dubbed him Doubting Thomas, and he has been reduced to a morality tale about the tension between having complete faith and having doubts in tough times. That's not fair. Doubts are part of being human, and it's worth pointing out that it's really not fair that the other disciples got to see Jesus large as life, but Thomas takes the fall for not quite being able to wrap his head around this great mystery of faith on the first try. Sometimes our faith falters, especially when things are uncertain or up in the air. But it doesn't mean that we are abandoned or somehow considered less worthy than others. Blessed are those who have not seen, but yet believe. We have turned that into a rebuke on Jesus' part. But what if we thought about it in the terms of a mission instead? Because of this passage, Thomas was written off by the church for a while. The rest of the apostles make appearances in Acts, and we see what happened to a lot of them. But we don't hear from our buddy Thomas. We know he was with them at the beginning of Acts when the Holy Spirit was poured out on all the believers there. And we know he was there when they received the commission to go and to be witnesses to all the world. The rest of the disciples went, but what about Thomas? Thomas doesn't show back up in the European historical record until about the 15th century. Explorers were finding new routes back into the Old World. There had been trade routes between the Roman Empire and places like India and China, but they broke down for a period of time, and Europe had to kind of find their way back into that part of the world. With those explorers came missionaries to share the news of the gospel with the local people. The Dutch were one of the first to make it to the shores of India in the 15th century, and their missionaries were full of zeal to bring the gospel into uncharted territory. Imagine their surprise when they found that the gospel had already made it there thousands of years before. Indian Christian tradition holds that a man landed on the Kerala coast around 52 AD. He spent about 20 years there, preaching, baptizing, and building churches around the country. He traveled to the Malabar coast, and some traditions even hold that he went into modern-day China to share the gospel. Tradition also says that Thomas the Apostle was killed in 72 AD around modern-day Chennai and interred there. A tomb was built in Chennai in the 16th century, and the St. Thomas Basilica stands there to this day. Thomas took the last recorded words that Jesus spoke to him to heart. "You believe because you see, but blessed are those who believe, but have not seen." He literally took that sentiment and ran. It wasn't a rebuke. It was a mission. Blessed are the ones who have no knowledge of the things that have happened here, but will still believe. Thomas, you have seen it. Now go and witness to what has happened. And he did take it to the very ends of the known world. He went, restored in his faith and trust, to leave behind everything he knew, to go and share the good news of the grace and power of Jesus Christ. This is the mission of all disciples, to be witnesses to where we have seen the power of Christ, where we have seen and believed, and to share with those who have not yet seen so that they may believe as well. If you have ever had your moments of doubt, it doesn't mean that Jesus is done with you, that you are somehow damaged goods in your faith. That is not how our God works. Our God is in the business of restoration and empowering people to witness and go and do things that would be impossible for them to do on their own. It is the power of the Holy Spirit that gives us the strength and capacity to be witnesses for Christ in this world. Thomas, you have seen and believed. Blessed are those who have not seen, but still believe. That is the legacy on which the modern church has been built. Blessed are those who have not seen, but believe. Our own personal encounters with Christ have looked very different from Thomas's, but we have had some kind of encounter with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in our lives. While we have not put our hands where the nails were, we have seen Christ among us in this world. Let us go and bear witness, so that those who have not had such encounters may also bask in the light of grace and mercy. Fly with Christ.